All right, importing. Importing is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward in Lightroom, and I will show you what I feel is the most efficient way to do it. Okay, so obviously importing is when you have photos that you want to get into Lightroom. You can import photos that actually exist on your desktop, which is what I'm going to show you today. Or you can import photos right from a memory card. And Lightroom is smart enough to actually pick up on when you plug a memory card into your computer, and it will automatically open the import box. So let's get right into it. The best way to do it for me, what I would recommend is, let's see here, let's go ahead and let's delete these photos. We're going to just remove these from Lightroom, not from the disk. All right. So if you want to import, highlight the folder that you want to import into and go down to import to this folder. Okay. And what it does there is on the right, the lower right hand side of the screen, this destination here, this little box, this is telling you where the photos are actually going onto your hard drive. Now the reason why you want to right click on the folder is because if you don't, then you have to manually go sift through these menus and find the exact one where it needs to go. And it's just a big pain in the butt. So the easiest way to do it is to just right click, like I showed you, right click, import into folder, and Lightroom will do that for you. Okay, now, as I said, whoops, let's get back in here. Okay, so as I said, we are going to be importing some photos right from our desktop. So to do that, you do have to kind of sift through these folders a little bit. You gotta on the right hand side here, you actually see all the available hard drives. I'm not sure what that is exactly. We're just going to ignore that. We'll go to our Macintosh hard drive. We'll go to our users, Joseph, and then I know that the folders are on my desktop, so we're going to click there. All right. Now, down here, we have a couple different options. We can look at our photos as a grid view or single view. Not sure why you would want to use a single view. A grid is way better to use. And then let's see, we can check all or we can uncheck all. For this video, we're going to uncheck all. And then you can sort these by file name, capture time. The best way to sort them is simply by capture time. And you have this little slider here where you can slide the size of your images. Okay. In the top left-hand corner, this is showing us where our photos are actually coming from. Further to the right, we have a few different options. Copy as a DNG. What that means is DNG is I think it stands for digital negative. And what that is it's when you're shooting in your camera, you can shoot in RAW or JPEG, and some cameras will even let you shoot in TIFFs. Those are different file formats. Lightroom and Photoshop, they use a DNG file format. And there are pros and cons to converting your photos to DNG. But one of the couple of the main pros to using a DNG file format is that A, they're compatible with Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'm not even sure you can process straight RAW files in Lightroom or Photoshop. Okay, so that's pro number one. Pro number two is that DNG files are about 30% smaller while retaining the same image quality as a RAW file. Okay, so I would recommend that you just copy to DNG. However, one of the cons to DNG is that people say, well, we don't know if DNG is going to be around in the future. If in 20 years from now, what if DNG goes away? What are we going to do? Well, I mean, I guess that's a legitimate concern. That's why I would recommend what I do is I do keep a hard backup of my straight RAW files. So I keep a backup on my memory card, as I mentioned in a previous video. when I'm shooting, when I fill a memory card up, I don't reformat it. I just buy a new one because memory cards are cheap. And when I have that memory card, I essentially have a copy of all of my files, my raw files. But another thing I do is I do copy my raw files onto a disk, which makes it, I use Blu-ray discs and I copy them onto there just to keep all of my really important raw files intact. But I don't really think it's much of a concern. In fact, to get on a little bit of a tangent here, simply keeping all of your photos as digitals is a risk in itself. Because if there was ever a situation where uh, internet went away, God forbid, uh, all of your photos would be gone anyways, and that's getting into a whole different area. But if there was ever a solar flare, it could, in theory, wipe out all of our internet, and all of our digital files would be completely gone. I mean, I know that there are scientists that actually talk about that being a possibility, and they actually recommended that photographers physically print the photos that they really care about, because even keeping everything on disk and in the cloud isn't 100% safe. So that's my little spiel on that. So yeah, just copy as DNG. That's what I would recommend that you do. Okay. So what we're going to do is we can hold shift and select everything, or we can say check all. We're going to uncheck all. Okay. But in this photo, in this instance, I only want to highlight a few photos. So I'm going to hold Command. I'm going to click on the photos I want. And then while they're highlighted, I just have to click on the check, and it will check all of the photos that I have highlighted. Okay, so there we go. Now, on the right, we have the file handling. Build previews. What that is a one-to-one preview is essentially, it's when you load your photos into Lightroom, it loads extra information into the program, so that if you're working with very large raw files, uh, if you have if you're shooting on like a D810 and you have these 36 megapixel files, when you go to zoom in on them, it'll take your computer a long time to process the image because there's so much information. So if you build a one-to-one preview, it makes it a little bit easier to look through those photos and work with them and zoom in on them. But it does take up more space on your computer. Uh, it also takes a longer period of time to import photos, because once Lightroom is done importing your photos, it has to build these previews, which take time. The previews, they're only temporary in your system. I think the default setting in Lightroom is 30 days, and then those previews delete automatically. Now, you can rebuild the previews in Lightroom at any time, but I typically will build my one-to-one previews right off the bat. Well, and that's not actually always true. If I'm shooting, if I have a lot of photos and I want to just get right to editing them real quick, then what I will actually do is I'll select Build Previews Minimal, because I just want the minimal preview built so that I get my photos in there real quick and I can get working on them. And then when I call through the photos and I delete the ones that I really don't want, then I will actually build my previews in Lightroom. The way I look at it is, if I think I'm going to have hundreds of photos that I'm going to delete, what's the sense of building a preview for all those photos? Okay. But you can just keep it simple and just keep it to one-to-one if you like. Smart previews, what that is a smart preview. When you build these into your photo, what it allows you to do is you can delete a photo from your Lightroom and even from your disk. But as long as you have that photo on a hard drive somewhere, then it can still exist in Lightroom, and you can make edits to it. And then the next time you plug in that hard drive that you specify, Lightroom will sync the settings, the settings that you've made to the photo, the edits that you've made to the photo. It'll sync it to the hard drive. So it's pretty cool if you're working on a laptop where you have very limited space. I have never actually used smart previews, but I probably will in the future. Uh, this is pretty self-explanatory. Don't import suspected duplicates. This is very helpful if you're importing from a memory card multiple times, like if you're on vacation and you keep importing your photos from the same memory card. If you click this, then you're not going to have to keep going through and highlighting the new photos. Lightroom will pick up on it. And then make a second copy. It makes a copy, and you can specify where you want it to go. So if you can go down here, you can choose a folder, excuse me, and then you can tell it where you want it to go. So you can probably create a folder on your hard drive on your desktop, and then you can import the copies to there, and then maybe drag that to a hard drive to back it up. Could be a pretty cool system. And then you can actually add to a collection as well and tell it where you want it to go. Okay. File renaming. So this is where you can actually tell Lightroom what you want to actually name your files. To be honest, I would not recommend doing this. I did this for a brief period of time. I would go in based on a photographer's recommendation. I went in and I renamed all my files. Um, I would actually like use a custom name. Let's see. So like I would rename my files like Zion Trip, like 2016. Okay, and I would do it that way. In theory, it seems like it's going to make sense because you think, oh, I'll have these really easy to understand file names rather than DSC-201 blah blah blah. That's what you think, but in actuality, you don't want your files to have those simple names. It's actually a lot easier to have these very specific names because if you ever go looking for these files and you don't have a preview where you can see what they actually look like, then you're really going to want these complicated image names to really be able to find your photos. It's also very helpful if you're doing something such as exposure bracketing, or if you're using HDR, where you have multiple photos in one file. You actually want these longer file names so that it's just easier to keep track of what you're doing. So I really would not recommend that you rename your files at all. Just keep them where they're at. Okay. The only thing I'd recommend is maybe every now and then you can go into your camera and reset the file names so that you start at the DSC0001. But I just leave it alone because I want my files to have those very unique names that they don't have a chance of. You don't have a chance of running into duplicates. That's really where the problem is. Where you'd run into a big problem if you had multiple duplicates. You don't want that. So don't rename your files. Apply during import. This is pretty much you can apply your presets to your photos at import. Don't do this either. I mean, I guess if you were a wedding photographer and you use a preset in all of your images, then yeah, go for it. But if you are just getting into editing your photos, just do them one by one. And then maybe one day you'll have a need to do this, but I seriously wouldn't recommend it. So that's pretty much it. All you have to do from this point on is click the import button, and it's going to show you that. Now you see here, okay, it's showing that it's building these one-to-one previews here. If you wanted to cancel that, all you have to do is click the X, and you can cancel those one-to-one previews. Okay. But I'll show you now. You can actually build one-to-one previews at any time. Let's see, one. There we go. So it's in Library, Previews, and then you see here we have the options to build the one-to-one previews. We can discard one-to-one previews if we don't want them bogging down our computer, and we can build or discard smart previews too. So we'll just go ahead and do that, and there it goes. Okay, so that's basically it for importing. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.